So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's Wicked Lunch, which is all about RegTech, resilience, and compliance. This is an event that we're putting on behalf of the UKFin network. So just to remind you what UKFin is all about, it's looking to bridge the world of academia and industry and taking a closer look at a variety of persistent problems in financial services, right? Including regulation and resilience and so on. We have a research agenda, which if you haven't yet looked at, we would encourage you to do so. It basically maps out what we see as the landscape of these persistent challenges which bedevil the financial services industry, and it's got a wide intended audience. And although it has a somewhat technical bias, but that's in line with our the body that funds us, which is the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council. So basically, in the research agenda, we highlight essentially here the problem pie, and these are the areas that we have identified as being part of this long-term so-called wicked problems that face the financial services industry. And underlying each of these problems, we have various application areas and research areas that underpin them. And we also, at the core of everything, we have a number of enablers that drive this kind of research agenda. If you want to know more about the research agenda, there is the link to it on the slide. Please do take a look. So today we're going to be focusing on two particular slices of the problem pie. So previously we had spotlights on financial inclusion and well-being. We also did coping with game-changing technologies. And now we're going to have a look at, in particular, at regulatory compliance, RegTech, and financial resilience and stability. And of course, this is a thorny area for just about everyone, especially businesses who are really struggling to keep pace with the emerging regulation, right? And it's not just the current regulations, it's the forthcoming regulations. So you can see here that the Financial Conduct Authority's regulatory initiative grids ran to 64 pages, right? And that was just in November 2023. So if you're a startup looking to keep pace with all of that, you can see that that's going to be quite a challenge. We also have other challenges in the UK context. For example, when it comes to the regulation of crypto assets, we've got the Bank of England, we've got the Payment Services Regulator, we've got the Treasury, we've got the Financial Conduct Authority, and so on. And it's difficult sometimes to obtain regulatory alignment. So I'm very pleased to welcome our panel members who are on the slide here. What I might do is just ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves. I'll start with myself. I'm Will Knottenbelt from Imperial College in London, and I'm the director of the Centre for Cryptocurrency Research and Engineering, and I'm also co-director of the UKFin network. So I don't know, Joy, would you like to introduce yourself?
With pleasure. My name is Joy Saleh. I'm with Kingston Business School. I helped set up the MSc FinTech at the school, and I'm also the host of the FinTech Hub. And I would just like to say that I have around 30 years of experience in industry, in addition to my academic mandates. And I'll stop here.
Fantastic. Sarah?
Hi, thanks, Will. Yeah, pleasure to be here today. And I did a software engineering degree many years ago. I'm always proud to say that, but also it's relevant in that so following about 30 years working in financial services mainly, so banks, insurers, asset managers and fintechs, mainly in risk and regulation, but covering, front to back, so from policy all the way through to technology and data and so on. I stepped out and created a couple of businesses to help in different ways. One's consulting, and one is collaboration. So we convene regulators with regulated firms, trade bodies, investors, academia, consultancies, and so on to solve what you call wicked problems, and we're sort of adopting that more and more. Yeah, so and it never ceases to shock me how challenging this thing is about keeping up with regulation. And it's not all the fault of the regulator, but still there's a long way that both they and industry can come. So yeah, really looking forward to getting into this today.
You're great. And today you're representing Collabs Global, is that right?
Correct, yes.
Great. And Iago from FundApps?
Thank you, Will, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Iago, and I'm Director of Engineering at FundApps. I have also been around for a while. I graduated back in 2002 when we did have computers back then, also on the tail end of the dot-com crisis, and that was not a fun time to get into the industry. But since then, I've worked in banking, charity sector, brief career hiatus to study psychology, and now I've been in the UK startup scene since 2010. I'm Director of Engineering at FundApps, as I said, and at FundApps we're building technology for monitoring and reporting of regulatory compliance, and that has a strong focus on automation. Our platform monitors about 15% of global assets under management, so that's about $30 trillion daily. And I guess expanding that a bit further, our vision is that clients integrate with our platform once and are then able to fulfill a growing range of regulatory obligations with minimal effort. AI has a strong and growing role to play in that. And, we're here to talk about wicked problems. And at its heart, RegTech has a wicked problem itself, which is a data problem, in that, financial institutions' data is often fragmented and exists in multiple systems, vendor ecosystems, and that presents a challenge and opportunity for anyone in this sector as well.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, whenever they do industry surveys, I think compliance is always highlighted as a major headache, and a challenge by businesses. So, I mean, maybe we can think about the breadth of the challenge here. I mean, you've mentioned some aspects of it, but just how broad is this challenge? It's obviously something that's not just pertinent to businesses, but it involves all sorts of different parties, right?
Yeah, I mean, at FundApps, kind of our view of the world has evolved over time, but one incarnation of that was having issuers, so as in companies who you invest in, investors, and this is people of all shapes and sizes, so from institutional kind of sovereign wealth funds through to hedge funds and pension funds and so on, and then the regulator. So you have this kind of tripartite almost structure, and they all have different needs with respect to each other, and they're all at different levels of technical maturity. So there's a lot of disparity in that. Obviously, the financial sector has been ahead of the curve in many ways in terms of the technical investment, but a lot of that has also come from a place of needing to preserve old functioning systems and processes. And I think there's a challenge in terms of technical maturity and adoption. There's a challenge of information flows. There's a strong challenge of collaboration as well, basically of distinguishing between what is a competitive advantage to something where everyone could benefit from more collaboration and more conversation. And even in my time at FundApps, I think there's been a distinct change. Mentioning one regulator in particular, in this case the FCA, where they have actively, particularly in recent times, engaged with industry and with this view of like creating sandboxes where people can go and innovate. And I think that is an interesting perspective to try and bring industry and the regulators more closely, knowing full well that you have to preserve a level of detachment and distance because you have to be able to enforce the regulation you put in place. But I think that is a very positive sign, and I'm hoping to see more of that. So I think that can at least bridge one aspect of the kind of collaboration gap. And yes, as I mentioned before, I think data is a huge challenge. I think this is a challenge for any of those players that I mentioned. And again, this comes from organizations growing, expanding, and often what in the old days used to be called master data management is far more complex, right? So you have had many incarnations of trying to solve this problem. Who remembers the kind of data lakes of the early 2010s and those kind of attempts? And I do think that AI is potentially going to allow us to leapfrog a lot of that if it's applied correctly. And it's an area where I would actually urge people to spend a bit more time thinking about how to do that.
Yeah, great. We'll come back to AI, but just thinking again about the breadth of the problem. I mean, Joy, this is a problem with lots of different stakeholders with different perspectives, different feedback loops, and so on, right?
Multiple actually, and it doesn't just touch on, so Iago, you expounded on what is happening in the asset management industry in particular, but if we look at global financial sector assets, we are close to $500 trillion in assets, and this sum is all regulated, not just the asset management industry. In terms of the UK here, if we just look at the size of the cost of compliance for financial institutions, this ranges between 10 to 15% of total operating costs. It's huge. And the fines by the FCA alone over the last year and a half or so were close to £250 million. So this is the extent. So it's not a matter of industry and businesses not adapting and developing the applications and having the conversations which enable compliance. It's a matter of, if you don't, you're also going to get fined and there will be significant costs here.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah, what do you see as the most significant challenges in this space?
So I am slightly biased, and I would say it's collaboration, but I believe it so much, and that's why I set up collabs. And I think just to explain it, and Iago touched upon it in terms of competitive advantage or sort of fear and so on. I think that's something that's potentially stopping people making progress. If you were to survey a room, and I've seen this happen, as to who thinks collaboration is a good idea and who would want to do it, all of the hands go up. Then the next question is who's actually doing it, and there's very few hands, and the gap is what we sought to address. And I always talk about the word abundance because there's so many wicked challenges to solve. And you touched on in the introduction about the sort of depth and breadth of that, and it's not only the distinct problems that need to be solved. It's the fact that you need to solve for today and tomorrow is always changing, evolving. The regulations, governments, and so on are changing. So yeah, it's a job for a lifetime to solve these. And if you think about interoperability, standards, globalization, the ongoing move to digital and so on, yeah, it's infinite. So somehow we need to do more, quicker, and with less. People have got less money, less time, and so on. So I always describe this as the best time to live and work in, but also for many the worst. But those of us who have the passion and sort of some answers to offer, it's great to compound that energy and work together.
Yeah, so in terms of doing more with less, I guess one thing that many people think of these days is AI, right? And it is tempting to think that, well, we might use a large language model to interpret legislation and maybe turn it into code that just makes sure that we are compliant. But I guess it's absolutely not so simple, right?
That's a question to me, right?
Yeah, anybody.
Yeah. Okay, so let me just kick off briefly then. Yeah, definitely. And we talk a lot about the 360 loop of regulation. So ideally, we'd be sitting here today with digital regulation. The pattern tends to be that a new or updated regulation comes out, and then there's consultation periods, to varying quality and depth. And then what actually gets implemented and rolled out is not perfect. But if it was digital, you'd be able to shortcut those loops. And it would be nice to think, I think there's a greater chance of having better regulation as a result. So yeah, that's just my tuppence.
Yeah, I guess you must have at FundApps looked into these shortcuts, right? And how AI can be applied. I don't know, what has been your experience?
I mean, it's still early days for us, I would say, and for the industry generally. So I think a lot of the software industry is focusing more on how can we actually essentially unlock better productivity or performance. Again, we can talk about that separately. That's a whole other topic. But I think there's a few areas here. So obviously, when we talk about AI, AI has been around in some form for a very long time. And in financial markets, if we think of AI as a mechanism for automation, machine-led trading, things like that have been around for a very long time. So in that sense, when I'm speaking of AI now, I'm talking about the more ubiquitous technology that we're, in terms of Gen AI and LLMs and so on. And I think there's a few areas there which are interesting, and there's areas which are maybe more or less kind of client-facing, if you want, like attractive in that sense. There's a trend for kind of agentic finance, which again is a way of shortcutting some things where you have a clear standard operating procedure where you can follow some steps and that can be done safely, still with human in the loop in most of the cases, right? But this is an area where it's interesting, where you can almost kind of pinpoint use cases where you might be able to replace some aspects of that. I read a report recently, which I can share the link after, shared by a guy called Ross Dawson, who's a futurist and talks about AI. And it talks about levels of maturity or levels of adoption. And a lot of the industry is somewhere between, starting to have agents operating in a slightly less known environment, but that's still not the case. That's not that commonplace. So I think AI has a role to play on the kind of front-facing side of that, and also on the execution side. Obviously, it has a role to play in terms of what it does great is research and scanning, large amounts of information and perhaps forming connections there. We have done some experiments internally at FundApps around being able to parse, human language regulation into something which is machine readable. It's difficult, and I think one thing that makes it difficult as well is, which we didn't mention, is the changing regulatory landscape. I think that's something that where you have, if you imagine these three big bodies, and again, I will say it up front, this is a very kind of Euro and American-centric view of the world, and there's a whole sphere there which I'm not as familiar with, so I can only speak to the context I know. But there's this big torsion between the US kind of regulatory approach of the current administration, let's say, what's happening in Europe, and also what's happening in the UK, which is kind of carving its own path post-Brexit. That creates uncertainty as well. And I think one interesting area is to essentially, and something FundApps has done, is make people aware of gaps that perhaps they didn't have because regulation is changing. Now, the other side where I think AI is very interesting and perhaps less explored is going back to what I was saying before about the data challenge. And I think, the old trope about data science, that data science is 80% data cleansing and then 20% data science, is, applies to the nth degree when it comes to AI, right? The inference or the quality of the, let's say the top level requirement is going to be as good as the data that feeds into it. And there is more to do to power things like data discovery, data integration at a far lower level. This is what I was talking about, master data management before. I think that there's a huge area there, which I think is untapped, and perhaps, not untapped. People have tried this over many iterations, but I think AI now maybe busts that open in a way that we hadn't seen before. So I think that's an interesting area as well. So both on the front-facing side, obviously on the trading side, and there's a growing challenge as well, where if everyone's using AI to do that, you then have to think about how you regulate for that, or what that might mean if everyone's using the same vendor, for example, and everyone goes in the same direction. But I think there's an interesting area, which I think I'm giving away one of my spoilers for later, but I think it's an area where I would like to see more focus.
Yeah, great, fantastic. Joy, what's your take on AI? You're muted currently.
Yes. Basically, with everything in terms of the various applications, there are a number of successful use cases that are widely used in industry, especially in the areas of anti-money laundering and CFT and what have you, because of the amount of big data. And if you see some of the Bank for International Settlement projects, they're actually great reads in terms of how network effects of some of the flows of money laundering and what have you are being captured by these models. There is a very big piece of work that needs to be done around data, as Iago mentioned. And also there's the element of data sovereignty, which makes it also tricky to compare notes across the different regulatory jurisdictions. So it becomes a little bit more tricky. However, again, it's a matter of how and when implementation of various models are going to be embedded within the regulatory process, within the activities of all financial institutions and asset managers. And this will take time, and it will have to be associated with a bit of unbundling. Iago mentioned, I mean, the name of your institution is FundApps, because basically in terms of the structure, we are assuming that everything in the world now is going to become modular and everything has to be in the form of applications that talk to each other. And currently this is not the case. And the other thing, regulators have to keep up, and this is on Sarah's point with respect to discussions and collaborations. This is not happening enough between regulators and industry, and there are gaps on both sides. So I'm not blaming regulators, because I used to be a regulator myself, so I cannot put the blame just there, but also with respect to having the conversations with industry and forums like this. I have found most of the UKFin activities so far extremely useful because of the construct.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're really trying to bring together academics and non-academic partners in industry and regulation and so on. Yeah, I mean, is there an opportunity here as well for RegTech to boost operational financial resilience and sustainability, do you think?
Yes, in my view. Or is this to Sarah? Sorry, I just
No, it's
jumped in.
to you, Joy, or anybody who wants to take it on.
I'll take it very quickly, just because of my other hat, because I'm still engaged in regulated activities in industry as well. There is a very strong link when it comes to the applications, in order to ensure that we are complying with operational resilience, both in the letter of the regulation and also in the spirit. Because one of the things, so Iago mentioned the number of vendors and concentration across vendors. Third-party due diligence is a very important aspect of what you need to be conducting and overseeing as a board in terms of operational resilience. It's just, it cannot be underscored enough in this respect. Sarah, over to you.
Yeah, no, thanks. I think one example of an area in resilience and security is around contracts. So for any sizable organization with multiple, like many suppliers, and within that, certainly the critical suppliers, it's really hard to get the right contract clauses in to meet the regulation, and then to make sure that they are consistent across an organization and cross jurisdictions. And I think the joining the dots across the organization, from policy, regulatory compliance to technology and data and so on, to kind of make that meaningful. So another example is a conversational tool so that people can ask questions and test the policies, right? Because yeah, there's nothing worse with done policies being written to look like good policies, but you know that what actually happens is there's so many exceptions to the policy, so the policy almost becomes meaningless. But this is where, you know, AI can and should be used to crunch through lots of types of policies and contracts and so on to come up with some, you know, better risk management. So yeah, huge amounts of opportunity with AI. And I think just one last point on that is I don't think we're doing enough globally as a human race to think about the best use cases for AI. So beyond the sort of basic things of automation. And there's a lot to learn from other industries. And then even, you know, from a totally different industry to financial services, but the learnings can be brought in. So, you know, there's some basic tools that will help, but we can all learn a lot by looking at what use cases and approaches go on in other industries.
Yeah, fantastic. Right. We're going to very shortly open this up to questions from the audience. So if you have a question, please pop it into the Q&A tab, or you can also just raise your hand and we'll come to you and ask you. Just before we get there, I have a little question. So we mentioned agentic AI before, right? And agentic AI really depends on the effectiveness of that depends on what tools you give to the agents, right? And so I was kind of wondering, like, what are the tools in this space that are really helpful for agents to be able to have? I don't know if anybody wants to take that on, like.
If we're thinking, obviously there's stuff in the payment sphere and stuff like that, which we could, and even open banking and those kind of things. But I guess in the regulatory sphere, if I think of the parts that come together, I think this is one where tapping into the right source of information is not that straightforward. And I imagine that, and again, I'm kind of looking forward a little bit as opposed to what we have now, but I think there's something there around how you can expose the right level of data at, you know, within an institution, so you can surface that safely. One of the concerns with something like MCP is that, you know, you have to think about what you're going to authorize, what you're going to allow it to do. I mean, again, this is one where I think collaboration would be important, because one of the problems, I guess, that we face as a RegTech vendor is accessing the right information in a way that we can provide it to our clients and actually enrich their processes. And I think that's one where there's a whole range of standards of that, or maturity of presenting that data. And I think perhaps one way in which you can use these kind of capabilities that you can present to agents is by presenting that data in a way that's usable to some kind of agent, right? And by this, I mean information that's perhaps important to make a regulatory determination as to whether you have an obligation or not. That's one example I can think of. But the other one is, the thing that comes into my mind when you ask that, Will, is that I think this is one where there's a level of discovery that still has to happen, as in, unless vendors actually club together and say, I'm going to expose my data. And there are many disincentives for this, by the way. There are commercial agreements that restrict what vendors are able to do with other people's data and so on and so forth. But I think this is one where actually thinking of it more of it as an ecosystem than a landscape where everyone's just kind of doing data in a bespoke format. It makes me think a little bit of that brief period, well, brief, it's still around, but the Internet of Things, right? Where we all had all these devices pinging information out. And then the big question became interop. I think this is one where we're still discovering actually what that standard looks like. But I think having some form of, yeah, it's more of an ecosystem play for me than just specific vendors publishing data.
Brilliant. We have some questions that are coming in. Please keep them coming in the Q&A tab. So John Vines asked, in relation to discussion around AI and the deployment of AI in regulation, how might we deal with the problem where AI and environmental and governance regulations intersect? So, for example, when our preoccupation to use AI in everything counters our commitments around net zero, environmental footprint, sustainability, and so on. Is this the wickedest problem of all? Who would like to take that on?
Yeah, I mean, I can have a quick go and then pass the others. So yeah, it's a really good question, and I think proportionality is one part to play in this, and just because you can use AI in something, it doesn't and shouldn't mean it doesn't mean that you should. So John and I already discussed this a bit, but I think so. So, for example, there's a really big RegTech who's raised and spent tens of millions now on just the first part of the value chain around digitizing regulation. And I've been saying for a few years, what about everything downstream? There's so much to do, and because once you come up with a standard and a standard feed of digital regulations using this AI to synthesize and so on. You've then got to make sure that all downstream RegTechs, conform to that standard. So that's one part. And then, of course, the cost of AI in terms of, money, but also energy. That's another big thing. And I think to the point around, is this the wickedest problem of all? It's definitely a mega problem. And this is where I think there's too many silos in fintech and regtech, and as Iago mentioned, regtech's coming together. That's really key, and also seeing more convening of parties around the table. The regulators do a lot of innovation, but then there needs to be something that pulls them all together, so we can solve together rather than separately.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sarah. Another question we have is from Darren Borland, and that is a broad challenge perhaps, but what are the panel's thoughts on how RegTech firms can show non-bias and model integrity to regulators? I suppose that's around demonstrating that their models for compliance and so on have no bias.
I'm happy to jump in for that one.
Thanks, Joy.
So I think that it's important that so there has to be some sort of technical collaboration across the body within RegTech firms. So obviously Innovate Finance UK do a lot of good work around bringing people around particular roundtables to discuss certain topics which are technical in nature for various verticals in the space. But having these conversations would help the firms cross-reference anonymized data sets so that they can, in the first instance, check the robustness of their models. And then this, if I wear my ex-regulator hat, is what I would like to be seeing. I want to know that they have already had these conversations among themselves, and I would want to be convinced. Have you show me the robustness tests? Show me how your model has performed out of sample for other data, not just your own closed data environment, and so forth. So I think it can't happen without both, in my view.
Brilliant. Thanks, Joy. And finally, we have a question from Maggie Chen. She says, we have heard a lot about the regulator and the firm's perspective, but how about the consumer perspective, right? Can the panel say a bit more about how these compliance issues, challenges, and opportunities affect consumers? I mean, is this something that does affect consumers in addition to regulators and firms?
I mean, there's a whole area of compliance which we haven't talked about, which is consumer banking, right? I mean, I only come at it from the perspective of, as Joy said before, kind of the asset management industry and that side, but there are companies doing stuff in this space as well, around more kind of, yeah. Again, my mind went to banking. Perhaps, Maggie, you had a different point of view on that. I think this is probably more where the fairness and bias things come in, right? So, and I think that is a wicked problem, because I saw a report, and I don't want to misquote it, but it was about just further demonstrating how the models understand certain ways of writing more than others, right? Or even ways of expressing. And again, that's kind of a sad feature now of how things have been trained. But I think this is an area particularly where on the consumer side, where we maybe have to see some regulation take a role here. And I think the EU's regulation around AI speaks about the minimization of harm. And again, I'm not a regulatory expert. I'll say that up front, right? I only know what I've read to prepare for this panel. But they are talking very much about that kind of minimization of harm. And there are certain things which they say you must not do as someone offering a service to the public, including things like social scoring and those sort of practices. So I think there is a role for regulation here to ensure that tooling is built in the right way. But that also has to be done with an element of allowing space for innovation, because ultimately, hopefully, I'm an optimist. I'm a glass half full kind of person, and I hope that these things will actually lead to better quality of life in time. But bias is a real thing, and I think that is not a solved problem yet.
Yeah, I think one thing that consumers sometimes struggle with is the transparency of decisions and stuff that are taken around them. And I wonder if there's an opportunity here to boost that transparency without turning the whole thing into a game that can just be played and so on, right? So I wonder if anybody has any thoughts on that.
Yeah, and the other point around, so it's a really great point from Maggie, because we, financial services, we do kind of, I suppose we can be guilty of having not served the consumers as well as they should have been. And there's so many programs which, do not really put the consumer at the heart. And of course, you've got consumer duty, which was about rectifying that. But again, it so easily just becomes another regulation to comply with. So I think one of the challenges is lack of participation. So transparency is one thing, but actually we need to hear the voice of the customer more. And, I heard this from a data vendor actually in terms of credit scoring. So that was heartening. And should be leveraged. I think the other trend we are seeing emerge, and it will really accelerate quickly, is personalization of services, apps, embedded finance, and so on. Open banking, open finance. It has different terms. In India, I was hearing, they don't even call it that. They've just got such great infrastructure of services and apps. So it would be nice to think that will cancel out some of these issues we're talking about. But I think that's one of the main challenges. If you look over the last 20 years, and well before that actually, and certainly the 18 years since the financial crisis, the consumers have definitely got a raw deal, and regulation only increased as a result of the crisis. So they got an even worse deal. But it feels like now we could be on a tipping point if we do the right things. But the reality is, whereas regulation is there to protect, it's had unintended consequence of, leaving the customer out. So yeah.
Yeah, great. We have another question just following up on the impact on consumers from Ian Gawley, who asks, what does the panel see as a step forward that RegTech can take to help restore consumer trust in financial services?
if I may start on
Yeah,
that,
sure, Joy.
Will. So a number of things. I'll play devil's advocate here on some of the things that we just mentioned, just to be a little bit provocative. So around 70 to 75% of all MSME financing in the UK, because when we talk about individuals, we must not forget, and consumers, we mustn't forget the SMEs, the MSMEs as well. So this is, so they're funded by fintechs, right? And if their data is not shared in an anonymized way of sorts, so we have to rely on the skill of the fintechs, which are actually manipulating their data and their ethical conduct to do so, even in the absence of regulation. So there can be the strict regulation as well, but if the industry as a whole is ethical and it is working towards fintech for good and for inclusion, then this will automatically help build trust with the consumer, especially if they're also able to access badly needed funding for their business. And in this respect, the initiatives by CFIT, I believe, are extremely timely and important in developing a company ID, kind of like our national ID for those who are not familiar with the project, which is coming as well. But basically, so this data is there in a portable, interoperable way, which can go to any provider of financing. And then the final point would be literacy. So coupled with this, there is a duty on the fintech community, the financial services community, and the regulators to be active in financial literacy, to explain to consumers and to small and medium-sized enterprises what exactly is happening with their data, what are their rights, and what data could they share to help them access better financing. So I'll stop.
Brilliant. I didn't know, Iago or Sarah, do you have thoughts on that one?
I just wanted to add something, and yeah, I was listening, Joy, as you were speaking, and I was just nodding the whole time through. I think there's also a point of representation, and it's kind of sad that we even have to make that point these days, but because there's a whole agenda against this in some ways, but there's someone I know from tech circles who is an advocate of let's say multiple intersections of representation, and they are also part of the board of a financial institution. And I think those kind of things matter, because this is perhaps how we can bring the focus away from maybe where these models have got all the biases from, to an extent. And I think that is also a way of building trust. And I think another aspect of that is, as Joy pointed out, literacy. I think that is, we cannot underestimate that. So putting on the consumer hat, because we're all consumers, right? We're all consumers of money, of loans, of credit ratings, of various things like that. And I'm a 44-year-old human, and I only recently started learning more about my own financial literacy. And this is someone who works in financial services. Again, I say that with an element of embarrassment. And the way I did that was through technology, right? So and one ingredient for this, which I think is very important, is open banking. It's both scary, but it's also hugely empowering, because I can choose. Choice is important, and it has to be true choice, but I can choose to expose my banking information to an app that can then help me make better financial decisions. I think that is a way in which I can feel more in control of what happens to my money and what I do with it. And I think that is an important point where I think literacy comes into it, access comes into it as well. There's all these social things. This is truly a social technical problem, right? It's not just a technology problem. It's also about how we teach people about this and the tools that we provide. But I do think, again, that technology can have a leveling role to play if it's applied correctly and with the right sort of mindset.
Yeah.
Sarah?
I just build on that. Yeah, absolutely. And the point around technology being an enabler, but it's people that do good things. It's people who make innovation happen and effective. And so back to the culture point. So to Ian's question, you know, what's the step forward that RegTech can take. So yeah, it's coming up with great solutions and more an ecosystem play. So in some cases, joined up solutions to be more efficient and consumer focused. But it's also working together as an industry, as an ecosystem to save the time, you know, so that we're not all trying to solve these wicked problems in silos. Because yeah, time is running out, and some of these challenges are so critical. I mean, economic crime has been cited as a matter of national security, and cybersecurity. Like every day you turn on the news, there's another incident. So I feel there's almost like an ethical issue here. You know, each of us has a role to play in kind of doing better and encouraging others to do better, and you know, creating initiatives that help people do better, because you know, on our own we can't, but together we can. Sounds cheesy, but it is true.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much, and thank you, Ian, for that great question. Right, so we have another question from Saba about actually talent related, which is a topic that we've not yet touched on. And the question is, given today's focus on resilience and compliance, how can the industry ensure that there are more structured entry points for junior talent in compliance and financial crime? Can RegTech play a role in bridging the gap through training or scalable supervision? That's really interesting.
If I may just
Yeah,
take the first crack at that, if I can, yes. So this is something that I'm very passionate about as an educator. That's my other hat. And I believe that we need to be doing a number of things at the same time. So on the one hand, we have to change the way we are developing talent at the university level and integrate much more with industry and practice, even at the undergraduate level, not just for postgraduate degrees. Students and talent coming to the industry in their early years have to be ready to start immediately. They shouldn't have to take some time to build up their skill set. Now, having their, so they need to know how to use the tools. They need to understand what are the innovations that are happening in their space or tangent spaces, because they can't understand just one segment of the industry in isolation. They will not be very useful to what they're going to be doing. So it's very important to do it in that particular manner, rather than just to teach some material which is divorced or kind of detached from where industry is. Now, moving as far as to say that RegTech players should be the ones educating the future talent, I think this is a little bit of, it's too narrow of a definition, because each RegTech would only focus on, so for example, if Iago were to launch a class on particular innovations that he's doing in his space, he's only going to focus on his component of the problem, right? He's not going to focus on the entire ecosystem. And this is where I believe academia is still relevant, and other upskilling organizations are still relevant to put together this view.
Challenge accepted.
Yeah, I think one more point to add there, Joy, is around new ways of learning. So more integrated learning. So, you know, with academia and industry and other parties, and also starting earlier. I mean, it's interesting. I was in Korea last week, and they were talking about their education system, which is very much a reaction to you know, the war, which is what, 60 years ago, not that long, and yet a long time, and yet not that long. But the education system is very much, you know, steeped in that, and you know, the lengths they're going to kind of address that gap. But in each region, you've got different inadequacies. But I think the point around AI and you know, different attitudes towards education and futures, it needs to be considered and addressed with different ways of you know, preparing the generations for work.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the concerns that young people have is that all the junior positions are going to be basically absorbed by AI, right? And they won't be able to secure one of these junior positions. But maybe it's about reframing it as an opportunity to help them learn the tools that they need to be more productive, right? Iago, you want to say something?
You just actually opened a new topic, which again I feel very strongly about because I think that is short-sighted at best. In fact, William, I think if you don't mind me saying, I think this came up in a recent conversation we had at Imperial College. But why would you cut out the workforce who is actually being raised AI native? It's completely absurd. But anyway, putting that to the side, I was going to say about one thing I'm very excited about when it comes to the intersection of AI and learning is the potential for hyper personalization of the learning experience. And this is actually about adapting the level of knowledge, the content, the information that's available, very much to the person who is actually initiating the prompt. Now, we can help people with this by building tooling around it, etc. But I think that is hugely exciting because you can actually have hyper-personalized curricula that suit the style of learning of the person, right? So not everyone's a reader, not everyone's a consumer of videos. Some people prefer in-person teaching. I think that's an aspect I'm super interested in. And also, the last thing I'll say is I'm quite pleased to say that our most recent grad who just joined us a couple of weeks ago is actually joining us specifically to do a InfoSec role. So I think there are spaces in industry, and people should make spaces for voices coming through. Again, I know people are following the trend and they're saying it's, let's cut this out because, hey, we can use AI to automate half of our engineering team. Good luck to them, and I will see them in a few months' time when they come back to the industry and try to hire again, as is happening now in various places.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much. Right, unfortunately, I think we are running out of time. Time is flying. Maybe I could just ask each panel member just to close out by suggesting some exciting opportunities that they see for collaborative research in this space, right? So UKFin is all about trying to encourage collaborations to address these challenges. So what are some of the collaborative research you would like to see going on? I don't know who wants to start.
I'll go very quickly, if I may
Joy.
start. I think all areas which intersect on everything which is related to operational resilience and specifically conduct as well, I think would be a great. I've worked a lot on early warning signals for financial crises based on financial macro indicators. Now I would be very keen on integrating conduct, non-financial indicators into that to predict the stress in institutions, and then collaborate with industry partners on how to hedge against that or predict it early enough so that it is addressed.
Okay, thank you. Iago or Sarah?
I'm going to bang the same drum I banged before, and I think I remember reading a few years ago a white paper which basically taught me a lot about how you think of data pipelines. It was one of the ones behind Spark, for people who remember that kind of technology. And I think I'd like to see more research in that area, like how you can actually use AI for data discovery. In a way, again, it has to be done in a way that is secure, because for financial institutions, and we know this because it's the most sacrosanct principle that FundApps operates under is the security and integrity of our clients' data. But I think having ways to actually do that data discovery and data integration at a low level in institutions is fundamental, because then it opens up a lot of that kind of ecosystem that we were talking about, if they can actually access that with information that's of better quality. So I think researching that kind of, maybe it's less attractive, it's less spectacular, but it's quite an important area. And this is everything from data quality, data integration, and then that kind of data lineage. So where has the data actually come from that powers the downstream tool? All of that is fundamental so that they can actually have transparency about the decision making and the reasons why a certain course of action is being recommended. Again, just to say, like, the quality of the inference depends on the quality of the data going in, and AI has a role to play in actually improving the quality of that data.
Brilliant. Thank you. Sarah?
So I'd like to see specific research around the relationship between sustainability and AI. So where AI can really help address the most critical issues within sustainability, that's not just carbon related, but also the sustainability of AI. So kind of how much does it actually cost, and where should we be? What can we do to make it more efficient and more accessible? So it's not just the sort of rich multinational companies, especially tech firms, getting richer, but actually it's available to others. Yeah, I think that's my top piece.
Fantastic. Listen, thank you very much, Joy, Iago, and Sarah. You've been amazing panelists, and I've really enjoyed the chat. I also want to thank Helen Orpin for doing the slides, and Rebecca and Larita for supporting the webinar behind the scenes. So if you are interested in more UKFin events, there are a couple coming up you may be interested in. On the Tuesday, the 14th of October, we're having an online funding workshop, and there's also going to be a research showcase event in Cardiff on Monday, the 24th of November. That's an all-day event. If you want to find out more about that, you can visit our website, ukfin.network. You can also join our mailing lists and so on. If you are thinking of a particular project, but you have some questions around what funding might be available for it and so on, then do sign up for one of our Zoom funding clinics, and we'll be pleased to answer your questions. And yes, that's it. It's 2 o'clock, so we're all done. Thank you, everyone, also for attending online and contributing to the discussions. I really enjoyed that. Have a good day, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Will.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.